Munn Dooley. I'm Deputy Superintendent for Teaching and Learning at the Georgia Department of Education. Welcome. I'm looking around at all my teacher friends. Sometimes when you're a teacher and you meet other teachers, it's like having a sister that you never knew. So I'm really glad you guys are here because this makes a world of difference. And when we get to the idea time, I've already given them a little cue to say, please, please, you're with our kids every single day. You know what they need, so I am encouraging every one of you to come up with some creative ideas to talk about what they need. So as I mentioned, I work with teaching and learning. So I have 3 organizational teams that work with me: teacher and leader support and development, Georgia virtual learning, and curriculum and instruction. And I'm going to talk about 5 big ideas today. The first is how we at the Georgia Department of Education are trying to shift our role in the state. The second is the data about literacy, just the landscape of where we are here in Georgia. The third is the changing role of literacy in society and what that's going to mean for instruction in the upcoming years. And then our Georgia literacy focus that we've already been working on since I got there. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about networked improvement communities and what that means. First, the shifting role of the Georgia DOE. Many of you understand that our local education agencies, the districts, they are currently in a place where they can waive many rules and laws in relation to inputs. And that's because we're really looking for outputs. We're really looking for the outcomes in our educational system to improve. And so we were thinking, and I say we collectively, the state, was thinking that if we were to release the school districts to be more creative and innovative, that we could come up with some really creative ideas. So what we have here is a really flexible educational system. We've moved from having just expectations and accountability to having true flexibility throughout all of our districts. But what that means is that we need a lot of support. And that's what the Georgia Department of Education has been trying to do, is figure out how to hold schools accountable, but also lend that support that's necessary in order to ensure that every one of our students is successful. One of the phrases that Dr. Gary McGibney, who's the Deputy Superintendent for External Affairs, says is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So we have been trying to change the culture of Georgia schools. Again, changing the department from a compliance and linear organizational structure to much more of a networked service and support structure. And many of you have probably read Good to Great. Jim Collins fans anywhere in here? Okay, so Good to Great basically is a book about how to improve business outcomes, and it was published about almost 15 years ago now. And many people read that book and thought, oh, well, we need to use metrics and improve our outcomes. When Jim Collins published that book, he then went on to Stanford University, and he was talking to a colleague, and he said, Jim, that book was horrible, which any of you know how popular that book is. He was like, what do you mean? And he said, for social sectors, we need to look at numbers, but we have to work together. Good to Great was about competitiveness, but in social sectors, we have to cooperate. So if you haven't read this little addendum that was published soon after Good to Great, called Good to Great for the Social Sectors, I encourage you to read it. It's very short. I have been accused of assigning too many readings, but it really is a good read. And it basically says, business does not have the market on metrics. We can use metrics in education, but we have to use them in a thoughtful and collaborative way in order to make meaning of where we are and then use them to move us forward. So what does this look like at the Georgia Department of Education? We are trying to move towards centering the work for all organizations within the system to focusing on the whole child. So this includes a more balanced approach to teaching and learning, looking at the systems of inputs in relation to how they influence the outputs, and looking at school as a hub for a systemic network of services. That doesn't necessarily mean that the school itself has to provide all those services, but the school just happens to have the kids there for almost most of the day, almost every day. So that can be a place where many of the other social organizations that want to serve kids can go and serve kids. This idea is not my own. This idea cropped up from the Get Georgia Reading campaign, which started before I got to the Department of Education. And the Department of Education is fully on board on the campaign, along with many other state agencies. Together, we are trying to create a networked service and support for children all through the state. We're here to talk about literacy. What does literacy look like in our state? The PISA is the worldwide ranking of different countries. It's offered by the OECD. And you can see here the purple is the OECD average. There's the purple, it's hard to see in here, and the red is where the US is. So when compared to other nations, the US is below average in mathematics, above average but just barely in reading, and just barely above average in science. This is a little alarming for many of us who like to think that we are way above average, but it's in fact not that different than how the US has fared for the last 20 years. However, you might be wondering how Georgia's doing. It's interesting to see that over the last 10 years on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that's the NAEP, that's the test that's given to a sample of students in every state every other year. We are about average right now. And this is a stacking of where the states sit, and you can see from bottom to top, Georgia's about in the middle. What's even more interesting is when you look close up at Georgia, you can see that where we sit on the NAEP relative to poverty is that we're outperforming poverty just a little. What this data show is the dark blue circle shows what our outcomes are when adjusted for poverty, and the light blue circle shows where they are when not adjusted for poverty. We're still in the middle, but it just shows compared to other states, where are we? So why am I focusing a lot on the NAEP? The NAEP itself is used as the main way to compare states. And over the last 10 years, Georgia has been growing very much over in reading as well as in math. We are often looked at by other states as an example, but our growth is somewhat slow. So if you were, and this is not a statistically sound analysis, but just to show the logic, if we were to take this growth and extend it out, assuming all else equal, assuming that none of the other states changed their ranking, and we just extend this growth line, it would take us till 2030 to surpass the national average. And we can't wait that long. So, what's getting in our way? Poverty. Our reading outcomes are highly correlated to poverty. It's an R squared, for those of you who like stats, it's an R squared of about 0.7. In other words, about 70% of our reading outcomes could be explained by poverty. So if you told me where someone sits in terms of their economic status, I could tell you with about 70% accuracy how they're going to do on the next milestones assessment. That can be disillusioning for many of our instructors here, but that's because there are lots of other confounding factors that affect a child's ability to learn to read. When you look at Georgia as a state, we are a very rural state, and we are a very impoverished state. This is data from the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, that show that throughout the southern and that middle swath of Georgia, we are very much an impoverished state. So what do we need to do? We need to look at how economically disadvantaged status relates to something like third grade reading outcomes. In this slide, you can see that it's almost identical when you look at where poverty exists and where our students are struggling to learn to read. And remember I said we are very much a rural state. So the swath right through here is where a lot of our impoverished communities are. In fact, many of you here who live in Tifton know this. You can drop a pin in a county and not go for 100 miles and get to another county with less than 100% poverty. So that makes it very difficult to create services for children. It's a very different system than it is in the metro area. So I'm going to take a little step back and talk a little bit more about what we're doing at the Georgia Department in terms of literacy and how literacy itself is changing. And then I'm going to talk about how we can address the issues related to poverty. Literacy itself is changing. And I think that part of the reason why the Georgia Literacy Commission is considering literacy in a crisis mode right now is because we're seeing the needs of our society change. This is just a little timeline just to remind you of where we are. LinkedIn was developed in 2002. Twitter and your iPhone, it's only 10 years old. If it were a kid, it would be in 5th grade. And we just now introduced tablets. When I look at our professional organizations, these are the organizations that produce policy statements and guidelines for our teachers, our educators, and our families. I've watched what's happened over the years. Each one of these organizations has changed their perspective on whether and how students and children should have access to digital technologies. And every one of these, during these years, has changed their view to endorse students having access to digital technologies and utilizing those digital technologies to become literate. So I want to talk about the difference between access and participation, because many of you may know that 100% of our schools now have broadband access. That means that they are all connected during the school day. That's fantastic. Not every state can brag about that. But what that doesn't mean is that all of our students can participate in a digital society, because most of their reading in their future is going to be done on a digital device. Some of them maybe still be reading novels and paper, but many of you realize that your newspaper doesn't come on your doorstep as often as it comes on your phone. So when we talk about digital literacies, I'm talking about participation. And one of the ways that we need to think about literacy as the ability to communicate in a digital society. So these are the International Society for Technology and Education standards for digital environments and digital literacies. And they're not just about deciphering what someone else has written. Instead, it's about empowerment, being a digital citizen, and being engaged in that mechanism for communication. So here's why I think this is so important. I think Georgia has an opportunity to get in front of this, but that doesn't mean that other people aren't getting in front of it right now. This was one of the exciting things that I found, and another exciting thing happened last weekend. But this is, again, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. In 2016, they changed their definition of literacy. So that doesn't happen very often. This is a very large organization. They do a huge assessment. For them to change the definition of literacy means they have to change everything that they do. And what they did is they now talk about literacy instead of reading literacy. What that means is they're looking for children to not only be receptive as readers, but also expressive as writers. So writing is going to be a very important component of all of this. They changed the word reflecting on to engaging with. Now think about that. The difference between reflecting on a piece of text and engaging with means that the meaning making is now in the hands of the user, in the hands of the reader. So again, they're constructing meaning, not just receiving meaning. They also changed, or they introduced the term to participate in society. That did not exist in the definition that OECD used before when they did the PISA tests. So when I say participate in society, that should bring up what that means in a digital society, which is as writers, as communicators, as producers of literacy, not just receivers. OECD did this in 2016. I was very surprised, but what surprised me even more, and I didn't put it as a slide yet because it just happened recently, the NAEP, remember I said the National Assessment of Educational Progress, the NAEP governing board meets several times a year. And at the last meeting they met, they talked about introducing other disciplinary areas to the NAEP assessment. So for those of you who are interested in education, you've been kind of paying attention to NAEP, you know that we have the reading test and the math test. We're going to be looking at other disciplinary assessments in NAEP very soon. That's fascinating, because that means not only do we need to learn how to read and write, but we need to learn how to read and write in order to participate in other disciplines. Science, social studies, computer science, all of those other disciplines are now going to be part of that process. Georgia has already gotten started on this because as a researcher, I've kind of been seeing the forest through the trees, and I saw this coming. So one of the things I did when I first started at the Georgia Department of Education is I was looking around to see, okay, what's going on right now? What works? Because I didn't want to introduce anything without understanding the context that it exists in. So I looked and saw Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy Grant. This was a grant that was competitively won by Georgia, and it has now come to an end. It was in place for the last 5 years with a 1-year no-cost extension. What we saw in that grant was 100% of our elementary schools, 100% of our middle schools, 100% of our preschool and pre-K centers have all improved their outcomes. 87.5% of our high schools have improved their outcomes. You may ask what happened to the others, and we'll talk. I think it may be funny in the data. But what this shows me, notice this graph right here. Do you see how it goes up and then down and then up and then down? I'm so glad Katie's here because that downward trend that happens in between, that's your summer slide. So if we were to really put pressure on literacy and maintain pace in order to really reinforce how kids are learning in and out of school, we would look at things like that in our data and take care of our summer slide. Another thing to know about the Striving Readers Grant is that it served 182,000 kids, and 72% of those children came from families that would be considered economically disadvantaged. It served 298 schools, and throughout the process there was a comprehensive professional learning strategy that was going on, and that produced several online modules that we're now trying to ingest so that we can sustain them over time. A nice thing about Striving Readers was that it created basically an R&D ability for us to look at how this plays out in different areas in Georgia, because you can see here that we had the Striving Readers grant in place across many different districts and schools throughout the state. About a year ago, we announced Literacy for Learning, Living, and Leading. And this is basically taking all the things we know about Get Georgia Reading and all the things we know about Striving Readers, taking the lessons learned from both and trying to figure out what can the Georgia Department of Education do to move this work forward and support it. So here are some of the things we've already done. For those of you who are teachers, you know that we've been revising our standards, and as we do so, we're embedding literacy across all content areas, because disciplinary and content literacy is very important. We've also been talking throughout all of our professional learning and in the standards about the need for multiple modalities. In a digital world, when you look at a screen, you have lots of things going on: print literacy, images, animation, design. Children have to learn how all of that is communicating meaning, and then they also have to be able to produce it. So we're talking about reading, writing, graphically representing, viewing, speaking, listening. Those are all skills that kids are going to have to learn as they become literate. And then also we're talking about the synergy between social, emotional, physical, and cognitive development as it relates to academic development, because we know more about the brain now. We know that all of those things feed into each other. And literacy is communication. Communication is, in its essence, social. So it shouldn't surprise you that social development relates very closely to literacy development. We've also introduced the teacher resource link in the SLDS system. For the teachers in the room, you know this is the system that you get to through your student information system, the Essentials Toolkit, which has all sorts of curriculum frameworks that teachers can use when they're new teachers or new to their grade level. And we're also leveraging all of the evidence-based practices that we know, because we have a lot of research in this area. We do know some of the instructional strategies that can work. But we also, through the Get Georgia Reading campaign, know that there are other strategies that need to be introduced outside of the classrooms, in addition to instruction, in order to move our outcomes forward. And those strategies can be leveraged through coalitions like this. We also have the Georgia Literacy Think Tank, which is 60 professors of literacy from all of our teacher education programs that have raised their hands saying, yes, we want to help. And those literacy faculty, RISA literacy specialists, and some of our outstanding educators across the state will be helping us make statewide improvements. The L4 Georgia plan, which is what the Georgia Department of Education has been promoting, pulls together not just the campaign cabinet from here in the state, but we also have many national partners who we can draw from in order to pull in evidence-based, research-proven practices into the state. So this is where networked improvement communities come up. And I'll talk a little bit more about what they are and go into the next. So the Get Georgia Reading campaign has 56 communities that have said, yes, we want to help with literacy. And through the chamber, I expect that we'll have even more communities say, yes, we want to help with literacy. The issue is, because our state is so rural, oftentimes these happen in isolation, and we have trouble communicating some of the lessons learned from one community to another community. So we have the systems for continuous improvement in the Department of Education. I'm looking at you educators because you've seen the little donut, right? That creates a common language for us. So we can now use that language in order to talk about what worked in one community and transfer it to another community. These become networked improvement communities because we're all moving toward a shared goal, which is improving literacy outcomes. This is the Systems for Continuous Improvement. It came from some of the work that we did in Striving Readers. It is a research-based comprehensive school improvement model, but what it does is it creates that shared language. It creates shared tools and resources, it creates shared processes, and it creates a shared framework for improvement and innovation. And because it works at every level of the system, the state, the regions, the districts, and the schools, that is how we create cultural change. Remember at the very beginning I said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. This is our cultural change. Cultural change happens through a shared language, imagined possibilities that are shared among a group, and shared goals. And by creating those shared ideals, we can move in the same direction. Another thing we've been doing is collecting resources onto this website, the L4 Georgia website, and we've been starting to create networked improvement community institutes so that we have some face-to-face convenings like this with educators and community representatives who are all focused on moving literacy forward. Face-to-face can help a lot, but we need to have an online platform as well. Because when people leave the room, teachers don't have a lot of time to go to a lot of face-to-face meetings. I'm sure that many of the teachers in the room right now are thinking, wow, this is pretty amazing to be able to come in the middle of the day to a meeting like this. It's quite unusual for us to get time out of the classroom in order to think and to be part of things like this. So having an online system to support all this is really important. The Georgia Learns platform is one that we are getting up and running right now at the Georgia Department of Education. It's easy to use, easy to enter, and it's interoperable. That means if a professor at Georgia Southern comes up with a course in Desire to Learn, which is the learning management system that they use at Georgia Southern, and wants to integrate that and put that out for any teacher in Georgia to use, they can do that through the Georgia Learns platform. So it becomes a very interactive, interoperable platform. This is just a couple screenshots so you can see how we're trying to network these communities using an online platform. And this is a screenshot to show that as we navigate professional learning for educators and for other community leaders, we can support them with the platform and they can see their success throughout their courses and their engagement across these different communities. So why do we want to do this? Remember I said in Striving Readers, 100% of our lower schools and 87% of our high schools improved. What we've done is we've taken all of our data related to poverty and outcomes, and we've created a matrix so that we can look at how those schools that have improved can support improvement across other schools. These schools become the seeds of improvement over time. And they can tell their story, they can share their data with their peers so that other people can learn from their lessons. So I've left you with 5 big ideas. One is the shifting role of Department of Education. Hopefully those in the room who are educators have seen that role take shape a little bit more, that we are more service and support oriented. Our data landscape for literacy, it's not horrible, but we do have to improve. And we have to improve in a way that aligns to the way that society is evolving. You see that here in Georgia, we do have a nice strong focus in literacy, but we need more partners in it. And we really need to create networked improvement communities who share the same language and share the same goals so that we can all be working together. As we are working on this, I have asked some of the teachers to offer an idea to the group, because again, I think we have a lot of people in the room who are working very closely with kids. Is it okay if we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I think it's that we've got to create a sense of urgency throughout the community, not just through educators or those business people who are inspired to bring better people into the work. It's got to be across the community and in every part of Georgia. And I think the more people that buy into it in a positive way, that we're going to have positive outcomes. And the many things that have been done through the health care with those well checks and that kind of thing, I think we can take it leaps and bounds further than that and have education fairs. You know, say it's the class of 2035 and we say, these kids that are born this year, they're going to graduate that year, then every year they'll go to an education fair. Say for Tift County, it would be at the John Hunt Center out here, and those parents would come and they would meet other parents, you know, and they would network with the schools and other people in the community, and we need those resources to help promote education.
Our teachers often get past this problem and told that it's their problem, but it's really our children collectively.
We do need to educate the whole child. We do an outstanding job in Tift County with our babies when we have them here in our schools, but they go home, and we need that support as well. It's very difficult to educate a child who comes to school with head lice and then has to return home until they're cleared. We've also dealt with other health issues, including an alarming increase in mental health issues recently. That's going to take the village to help us raise these children. We have guidance counselors in every single school. We have social workers that serve each one of our schools. Of course, we're on the community eligibility program where we feed every child with no cost to parents. We have summer feeding programs. We extend the school year for some children. However, we don't have the funds to extend the school year throughout the summer for every child. That's another need. The summer slide is indeed very real, and teachers are dealing with it right now as they're getting children back in school and trying to catch them up. So we do have a number of things that we have used, but we always need continuing community support.
And if you could identify yourself.
I'm Jan Wise. I'm Curriculum Director for Tift County.
So please take the opportunity. Caitlin, we've got a few more minutes that Caitlin can
How
help
many
you
of you
with
would
that.
like more time for planning?
I was just kind of piggybacking off of both of these comments. Ms. Wise mentioned that we have the feeding program in the summer in several of our communities within Tift County, but we were even thinking, what if you were to partner with other organizations within the community, be it banking organizations or parenting organizations of different kinds, to even offer classes for parents. I know there was one school within our system as they started back this school year that went to visit part of the feeding program in their particular school zone, and they were able to meet with parents at that point. And I think sometimes when you mentioned the poverty issue earlier, it is very real, and some of it might help if we meet the needs and meet them where they are, rather than expecting them to be part of the institution that we are, meet them where they are instead.
I'm Caitlin Ross. I'm a 4th grade teacher. I don't have a fancy title like all y'all have, but last year I was actually trained as a literacy coordinator, and it was one of my best years because I had a lot of professional development, 2-3 days a month, and it was a lot, and it was a lot of work. However, I had one of my greatest years. This year I know I'm going to have the same. So that's one of the things I know that teachers need is more of the professional development. It's been cut back. So this Georgia Learns, that makes me pretty excited because that's something I can do on my own. It's kept track of, but then also, you know, we need more common planning and things like that. So resources for that would be well.
And Caitlin, before you give that back, just a quick question. So you mentioned this program, they had the opportunity for professional development. The commission would like to hear from you. Give us the high-level details. What did you learn and what were you able to apply to get the results that you had last year?
Well, it was our literacy collaborative. It's pretty much your trained reading, writing, language, how to integrate that all in the classroom. I'm trained now to be a coach for teachers, but basically the training took you through how to do reading, not just how to do it, I shouldn't say that, but took you in depth of how the child learns reading, how they learn to write, and that type of thing. And we had several assignments due, but they were all beneficial to help us just dig deeper into what we're actually teaching each day.
And what results did you see last year?
GMAT scores were very well.
And that acronym is for those scores, so everybody knows what you're referring to.
The Georgia Milestones
Yeah, the
test.
milestones.
I'm sorry. Yes, our Georgia Milestones that they took last year. We had a lot of growth. Actually, our fourth grade had a lot of growth. Now, we've actually changed reading programs this year, but what we've actually noticed is what we've been doing in the past actually aligns with our new reading program now. So we've actually been beneficial in that as well.
Good, and thank you for that. Knowing that you're a fourth grade teacher, we're not going to pick on you, but this is 4th through 12th. And one of the big questions is if children don't read at grade level at 3, what happens in the 4th? What happens in the 5th?
It gets farther and farther behind.
Okay.
It's very hard to catch up.
Got it.
It's very hard.
How difficult or cumbersome is it to be able to have more literacy coaches, teachers, or educators trained as literacy coaches?
Not cumbersome at all, we just need funds. We know how to do it. That's the thing, it's capacity that we're lacking right now. And we do have success stories that we can grow on. I think you're hearing that in the room. You have a lot of professionals here who know this has worked for me. We have data and outcomes that prove it. And one of the things I would say is it would be really helpful to have coaches in the high school because, I mentioned NAEP, integrating literacy across the content areas. When a child isn't proficient in reading and literacy, especially in writing, in elementary school, it just gets harder and harder. And then sometimes our content specialists, science teachers, physics teachers, they may not know how to teach reading. And so having a literacy coach at the high school might also be an idea. And we would love to support that in any way. We do have institutions of higher education with professors with knowledge about how to do that. We just don't have a lot of influx.
I think SREB, Southern Regional Education Board, has done about, I think maybe they've trained 800 people in this state. Am I correct?
I don't know.
But they've done a ton of people. They've done the training because they've got a literacy, because we've got to embed in the math, English, et cetera. My question to you is, on your network to improve communities, I believe you said you had, what, was it 59?
We have 56 Get Georgia reading communities, but we also have our Striving Readers schools, 298 schools that have shown outcomes.
All right, so we got 298 schools in the thousands of schools in Georgia.
Yep.
So my question is, how many superintendents know about Network to Improve Communities, and those that do, how many of them have put a program on for the parents and guardians in their communities? So their parents have a clue what we're talking about, since we can't seem to get anybody to come to meetings anymore in any of our communities. So it's a two-part question, I guess.
I wish I could answer the question. I don't know how many superintendents would already know about this because this has not been launched yet, the networked improvement communities. But it is a research-based strategy.
DOE traditionally has come up with some really good ideas over the years,
Yeah.
but nobody knows about the DOE. I mean, I've been to more meetings over the years where they have all these wonderful ideas, and this is a great thing that you're showing. But if it's not being communicated, I mean, we're talking about outputs, folks. Well, outputs is the final product, which is the student. And if the people along the way don't know what's going on, we can't get there.
Yeah.
We can have all the programs in the world, but that's not a whole lot.
So that's a
Even the
communications.
290 schools or whatever,
Yeah.
in the context of the whole state, we need to do a better job of getting the word out, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And I'm saying this is a strategy to do that. We already have several of our professional organizations on board to help us. The Georgia Association for Educational Leaders is going to be one of the first participants in the network communities, as well as GLSSI. So we already have our professional organizations coming on board and saying, yes, we want to do this. We've got to create that group of influencers first. That's how we work as a cultural change initiative. So we get the influencers working, and they will have a say in how we develop it, and then we'll be inviting all of the practitioners on.
Then you take those people on the wall over there called the Georgia Chamber of Commerce.
That's why I'm
That's the
here.
biggest influence you're going to get anywhere. Okay? If you want to get something done like this, that's who you go through, because they write the checks.
And that's why I'm here.
Perfect. And Caitlin, we have a question or comment here.
Yep.
And while Caitlin's moving there, thank you very much for that. Remember that the working relationship between the commission and the advisory committee is to put questions just like that question to the advisory committee. So if this is accurate, if this is true that this works from a research perspective, what do we need from the committee? How do we connect with the right people? So we have that captured. So thank you for that. And there was a comment in this back corner. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Lauren Duncan, and I'm the literacy coach that Caitlin, at the same school Caitlin works at. I was just kind of, when we drifted to your topic over here, you know, we at our school, we do have parent involvement nights where we have math nights, and we have literacy nights, and we have fall festivals with the book fair, and we try to attach that. But sometimes we find that, you know, you try to give them a reason to come, you know, other than just literacy. So, I mean, would it be beneficial to have a partner come the same night that we have those things to try to pull people in? Because it's almost like you have to kind of create a buzz and excitement to get them to come, other than just you're going to learn about what's going to help your child. And even though that is important, but sometimes we need incentives like we're going to have some food out, and you know, that helps people get out and come and want to come. But it's so hard to do some of those things sometimes. So if we could get I mean, I know we say something about going into the neighborhoods, but I do think that, I mean, like, we have so many that show up on that first night of school, the open house, to get their schedules. If there was just some way, we are trying, but just an incentive to say, hey, come on out, and maybe this could be something that our partners could help us with.
And while I'm walking over, I also want to mention the connectivity issue. We have digital access in every school, but when kids go home, when they have their weekends, when they go over the summer, we do not have access. So that's something too that I'm going to plead with the chamber for, is really advocating for our kids to have connectivity outside of school. Did I steal your idea? I'm so sorry.
Well, that's exactly where I was going. You talked a lot in your presentation about I'm a digital learner, but the only thing I heard you mention digital was really the connection between schools. I guess I would like to challenge you, and then I think it does bring up several issues here that this board might want to even comment on. How can you use the power of digital at home? But that also assumes that home is connected. And I think I hear a lot of students not being able to do their homework because while the internet is ubiquitous to me, it's not ubiquitous to everyone. So I think that's one of the issues that I'd like to hear you comment on. I think the second issue I'd like to hear you comment on is digital learning. Using digital is a two-edged sword. What I understand is that we've become less word-oriented and more visual-oriented. So Facebook, Instagram now, Insta movie, or whatever they do now, whatever it is, we're becoming emojis. We emoji ourselves. We don't say what we really think and feel, but we put an emoji down. I guess to me it's sort of a two-edged sword in using digital to teach. We need to teach them to use words rather than necessarily emojis too.
So in Tifton County, grades 9 through 12, we've launched a Chromebook, a one-to-one Chromebook for every child in Tifton County to have access to. But one of the things that we also have to work on is partnering with our local businesses to assist us with that networking at home, digital connectivity at home. Although our students have been provided those Chromebooks, but when we talk about students who come from poverty, they don't have access to the connectivity at home. So that is something that we are working on as a school district to partner with our community partners. So we do have, in our director of communications, she kind of facilitates our partnerships in our community. But we partner with Tifton Regional Health Group, we partner with the hospital, we partner with our local restaurants, we partner with anyone who's willing to partner with Tifton County Schools. And we thought about asking them to allow our students to come and just do homework in their businesses, just like McDonald's provide. But we are looking for ways to allow our students to have that digital access beyond the 320 bill.
I was wondering, you had mentioned, maybe 10 or 15 minutes ago about possibly putting literacy coaches in the high school level, and being in adult education with TCSG, I'm really interested in the adolescent aspect of the 4 through 12. So I was wondering, do they still have graduation coaches or something in place for possible early leavers of high school or dropout prevention programs? I'm curious to learn more about that.
Thank you.
I'm Annalisa Thomas with TCSG.
We do have graduation coaches in Tift County. However, state funds are no longer available. Our graduation coaches are paid through local funds. So that too has been a restraint for us.
What would be beneficial for me to understand is I've heard about literacy coaches, I've heard about graduation coaches, but unfortunately I don't know what either of them do and what their roles are. They weren't available when I was in school, so, or maybe they were and I didn't, need it. So if you could tell us what a literacy coach does and when they intervene or when they're assigned to students, and then tell me what a graduation coach is, that would be beneficial.
Oh, you want me to explain that?
Yeah.
Well, I kind of can.
Whatever you want.
I kind of can.
And you are?
I'm actually an assistant principal now. My name is Jennifer Howell, but I'm a former literacy coach. So in my training, we're trained to work with teachers, to look for strategies or ways that we can bridge a gap in instruction with students. So we spend a lot of time being trained in research-based strategies and then redelivering to teachers, but not just working with teachers, also working with small groups of students and really becoming an expert in that field, just really being the go-to person. So lots of data analysis, lots of strategy work, lots of intervening with teachers and students. So you have RTI, your tiers of intervention. You look at those students, but you also look at students that are showing weaknesses or whatever and try to intervene early. So it's really knowing your students, knowing what they need, knowing how to bridge that gap, and really collaborating with, all your teachers, every member of your school, which leads me to what I wanted to say. So you kind of just led me there. You ask someone, which one of you ask, when we get together, what do we talk about? What is the commonality and what we have to say or our complaint or our concern? And I think our number one issue all the time is we just need more people. Teachers teach kids, and we know how to do that. We're experts in that. We want to do that. Our teachers are passionate. I'm now in a 6th grade school, and what I see now coming from primary to elementary and in a middle school setting is that my content area specialist, yes, they are the master of their content. They're excellent science teachers. They're excellent social studies teachers and math teachers. They know their stuff. That's their degree. But they see the need for literacy, and they're willing to do, whatever it takes. They're willing to be trained. They're willing to work with our academic coach. They're willing to stay after school and go above and beyond. But it's funding. When funds are cut, personnel's cut. So that's really where a big issue is. And then I've got one more thing, and I'll stop. We attended a training last week in our district on mental health first aid that was redelivered by the state, and that was very empowering for me personally, because as an assistant principal, I deal a lot with discipline and children that are missing classroom time because of the different issues that they have going on. And I think you find that so much more in impoverished areas. Our children are coming to school with so much on their shoulders and on their minds than we could ever imagine. And I don't think it's because the parents choose that. I think it's because that is just what we live in. And so being equipped with how to deal with those situations and understanding that it's not bad behavior, but it's a mental health crisis, and how to go about that has really changed the perspective of discipline and how to get those kids back in the classroom. So more training in those areas, not just for educators, but for parents and people in the public in general, and how to help these kids and their parents, I think is just extremely necessary.
Would you be willing to respond to a follow-up question, just real quick about the literacy coach?
Depends on if it's hard.
So you, not hard, this is fail-safe. So you mentioned, and when you talk to the commission, when you say thing, we need more, the more specific you can be about what you need, the easier it is to provide it. Not to say that, so if you had more, what would you have more of, and what would they be doing?
I would have more teachers, more certified staff, a para, a teacher. The more teachers I can get in front of a small group of students, the more students I can reach. If I have 6 students in a small reading group, I can take those kids from below grade level to grade level in a matter of weeks. If I have
Say that one more time.
From below grade level to grade level in a matter of weeks. It's not magic. It's just that you reach more kids when you have a teacher present. It's the difference in being on a computer and clicking an answer and a teacher saying, you know what, your thinking is right, but think a little deeper about this. It's just a little encouragement, and you can't replace a teacher. You just can't replace that. So
Do you have a recommendation about the number of teachers and paraprofessionals per student?
I haven't thought that far, but as many of you got, we'll take them. I can tell you this, our school system has 30 minutes a day designated for interventions. And I can tell you at my school, we've gotten as creative as we can get. We've got in the morning, about 10 intervention groups, about 20 groups going all day long. Well, we've been so creative that we've got kids in small groups that have been designated as our highest risk students. Then we reach down and we get the kids that are next, because we don't want to lose those kids that are on a cusp of grade level. Yep. But our folks are working and training, and it's because they're passionate, and I think that's all over the state. It's not just my school. Sure. But the smaller groups we can get, the more kids we reach, and that's just a fundamental of education. So I don't know, I could take about 3 or 4 more people and make some magic happen, but I'd be good with 2. I mean, you know.
Thank you very much for that. Again,
Just to follow that up, we would love to have one person at the Georgia Department of Education focused on this, aside from me. We currently have 2 English language arts specialists, and then we have 2 federally funded literacy specialists, and that funding is going away.
I'm confused a little bit. This is where the GDOE wants to go.
Yes.
But you all are not doing all of these 5 things, right?
We are.
So throughout the state, you're sponsoring networked improvement communities and everything, because it doesn't seem like I'm seeing it.
I've only been there 2 years. And we have been, and I'm working on a very limited budget. I will say, just to give you an idea of what my reality looks like, when we roll out standards, I had about $100,000 to roll out standards statewide in one budget cycle. So that just, we're doing as much as we can. We have done all the things that I mentioned in there, and then our networked improvement communities plan and the website are both in development right now. I am seeking external funds so that we can support as much as we can, and I'm also working internally to reorganize a little bit and utilize our funds more efficiently and effectively.
We need to give these teachers some hope.
Yes.
I have served on 2 education funding formula groups. Okay, I will not serve on another one. I am hopeful, and here's the good news. What we came out with last year, if we ever implement it, and hopefully we'll do something in Governor Deal's last year, is we actually have a poverty factor in the formula. Now, and that sounds ridiculous. I know that we've never had that before, but there's actually going to be a poverty factor in the formula. Because anybody thinks a kid can learn when they come to school and they got their head lice or they haven't had breakfast versus these kids, or the number of words that a child learns when they come from preschool, if they went to preschool, I mean, they're deluding themselves. And quite frankly, the legislature has deluded itself over that. The other thing that's good, and I'm going to give the state a plug here, Mike Royal, who's chair of the board, they just recently again hired my friends at SREB, because I'm real big on career readiness. I'll say it publicly, our pathways here in the state of Georgia in secondary are not very strong in a lot of areas. They've just hired SREB with their pathways, they've got 7 or 8. But the important thing is in those pathways, they embed literacy for math and for English, and it's all project oriented. Because at the end of the day, I'm a believer that education is to prepare people to be more productive in life. You know, not some esoteric thing, but to be productive, whether it's elementary school, middle school, high school, quite frankly, in college, in technical college. It's not an end to itself, it's just a means to go forward. So I do think the state is making progress in these areas, but it's like she just said, she's been there 2 years. You're turning a battleship, folks. But it goes back to what we said earlier. Everybody's got to get in this game, particularly the business community. And I'm not picking on chicken sandwiches for lunch, that's nice, but that doesn't do it. Because we're training their workforce. And we don't get any federal money, and there's less state money. We're asking for more money from the local people, but we're training their workforce, and that's why the chambers, it's very, very important that they get behind this initiative.
Thank you.
So Caitlin, thank you very much. Let's give, Caitlin a hand. So I'm going to make just a quick recommendation, and I'm going to ask if you would all play along. Let me do this first. I'm going to describe a program that I'm familiar with, kind of take my facilitator hat off, and it might address some of these issues just for your consideration, because at the end of the day, we're making recommendations. Then I'm going to turn you loose for a couple minutes to have some conversations among yourselves in developing recommendations, questions, observations. So the Partners in Education program that I am familiar with in a small county in Florida engages business partners in a very formal setting. And the two-way street is this. The partner comes to the school in order to help in any way they can. And that means providing direct funds. We're allowed to do that. We're able to contribute money to that school. And in everything from classroom setup, any in-kind donations, so on and so forth. And the partner's also talking to the teacher about, this is what I need. You know, this is what it means to have a worker who can work in my organization. It is very, very successful. The two-way street is then the partner has access to that school and the parents as consumer of their products. So it's it's called Partners in Education, known as PI. So just know there's a lot of those very formal programs around. Second thing, real quick from a process perspective, what I'd like to do, based on this wonderful information that you provided and knowing at the end of the day, we need to come up with recommendations. We're going to have a facilitated discussion. I also need to transition some of this technology. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to work among yourselves. You can reach out to somebody across the room that you might have heard a comment about and you wanted to follow up on. You might just partner with the person right next to you. Your goal is to formalize, is to write down, is to think through questions that you have, comments that you'd like to make, and most importantly, recommendations that you would want this commission to consider. So I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes. And so you have 5 minutes to think through, to access the resources in the room, and to formalize what's in your head so that when we get to the facilitated discussion, you're able to quickly give us recommendations.